This lecture will introduce you to the scientific method, which is the general approach that research scientists use to evaluate the world around them. This method is what distinguishes the field of psychology from other fields that ask similar questions about human nature, such as philosophy. In our modern world, you're constantly presented with scientific findings. This could be through courses you take, through friends, or when watching TV or surfing the internet. Here I have developed a hypothetical advertisement, similar to many you have likely seen before. My new miracle weight loss formula, Full of It, is designed to convince your body that you're full, leading to less eating. It is made with all natural ingredients. My evaluation of the supplement found that individuals taking the pill along with 3 healthy meals and exercise lost an average of 2 pounds a week. Are you convinced? I have the scientific evidence to back me up. Let's assume I did the research, honestly, and actually found that people did lose an average of 2 pounds a week when taking the pill along with a balanced diet and exercise. Can we conclude that my pill helps people lose weight? Why or why not? If you said false, you are correct. The loss in weight may have been due to the pill. It could also have been due to the healthy diet or exercise. Or it could have been a combination of 2 or even all 3 of these factors. This lecture and the others on methodology will help to train you to be able to evaluate research more critically, which is a great skill for lay people as well as for researchers. One of the characteristics that distinguish psychologists from lay people is the use of scientific inquiry to answer questions. Scientific inquiry is a way of finding answers to empirical questions, questions that can be answered through observation and measurement. Using the scientific method, which is a set of systematic procedures for observing and measuring phenomena to answer questions. For example, both lay people and psychologists may be interested in why good people do bad things. However, psychologists will develop studies to systematically test this question. Another important characteristic that scientists develop, and you will begin to develop this term, is the scientific attitude. The scientific attitude is composed of curiosity, skepticism, and humility, and each of these characteristics is helpful in doing scientific research. Curiosity is important, of course, because we want to have questions about why the world works, specifically why people do the things they do, or think the way they think, or feel the way they feel. Skepticism is important because you don't want to always go with the first answer or automatically believe that the existing theories are correct. You want to uncover the truth like a detective. Humility is important because your ideas about human behavior will not always be right, and you have to be willing to accept the evidence and adjust your ideas and theories. So how do psychologists go about asking and answering the questions they have about the world? As like all scientists, we use the scientific method. We construct theories that help us to organize, summarize, and simplify the complex observations of the world around us. These theories can then be used to develop new questions or hypotheses about why the world works the way it does, and then help us to organize and develop our research plan. There are 4 major goals of psychological research: to describe, predict, control, and explain. First, you want to be able to describe what your phenomenon is. For example, perhaps you're interested in physical attraction. What does it look like? What are the behaviors that are involved when people are attracted to each other? What are the thoughts they think about the other person and themselves? And how do they feel? Next, you want to be able to predict when your phenomenon is more or less likely to occur. For example, what factors are likely to increase attraction between people? One hypothesis is that people are more attracted to people that are familiar to them. So the next step would be to control or create a study that tests your hypothesis. Using the hypothesis that familiarity increases attraction, what is the face that is most familiar to us? Well, it would be our own. We see it in the mirror, and it also shares many features with our close family, who we see most often. So we could develop a study to see how features similar to our own increase attraction. In fact, there have been studies that have done just this. One study examining the attraction of heterosexual men showed them photos that were morphs of 20 faces, half of which were unfamiliar female faces, and half of which included their own face invisibly morphed with the female faces. The men rated the pictures with the face that included their own as more attractive. At post-test, they were asked if they detected anything unusual, and they were not able to detect the presence of their own face. The final goal is to explain this difference. The way the researchers in the example I just discussed explained it was that the familiarity and similarity of their own features that were invisible in the photograph were more attractive to them and increased their attraction towards the female faces. There are 5 basic steps to scientific method. The first is to hypothesize, then to operationalize, then to measure, then to evaluate, and finally to replicate, revise, and report. A handy acronym to remember these steps is HOMER. We will define and discuss these steps shortly. So what exactly is a theory? As mentioned earlier, theories allow us to organize and summarize a large body of research. It allows us to classify studies under a particular theoretical framework. It also allows us to quickly evaluate the state of the field and generate new hypotheses for additional research. One theory we will discuss as an example of the process of research is that low self-esteem is a factor that contributes to depression. Typically, theories have been built up over time. They involve multiple hypotheses and multiple tests of these hypotheses that demonstrate consistent findings. A hypothesis is a testable question, one that may be prompted from an existing theory, or multiple hypotheses may be combined to develop a new theory. So one testable hypothesis involving self-esteem and depression is that people that show low self-esteem are apt to show more depression. Since many of the variables psychologists are interested in are not directly observable, we need to operationalize them. These internal characteristics that cannot be directly observed are called constructs. Both depression and self-esteem are not directly observable, so we will need to operationally define what each of them are. This operational definition identifies how we will measure our internal characteristics using external behaviors. For example, depression is often measured by external behaviors such as affect or decreases in activity and interest. This operational definition is then used to develop the measurement and assessments that will be used by the researchers. Now that we've developed our hypothesis and operationally defined the variables, we need to collect the data. The methods we use to collect these research observations will depend on what type of study we are using, which we will discuss later in lecture. For the sake of our current example, we will give 2 self-report assessments, one of self-esteem and one of depression, to examine if people with low self-esteem tend to also have more depressive symptoms. Here's a flowchart of the research process, from observations of behavior to a developed theory. We will go through each individually. For this example, we will use the theory that frustration often leads to aggression. You've probably heard the tale that Sir Isaac Newton developed the theory of gravity after observing an apple fall from a tree. Many individual studies and theories start with an observation of the world around us. Another example could be you notice children on a playground start to push and shove more often when they're made to wait. For example, you see that when a child at the top of the slide is taking too long, the kids right at the bottom of the ladder are more aggressive than the kids further back in line. This may lead you to the hypothesis that frustration leads to an increased likelihood of aggression. You may then want to move beyond describing the behaviors to testing and explaining them, so you will need to develop a study. Before you conduct this study, you will need to operationally define both aggression and frustration. We could limit aggression to only physical aggression. However, then, what is physical aggression? A simple definition would be physical actions with the intention to cause harm. Then you would need to specify exactly what those actions are. You would then do the same with frustration. You would then conduct your test of frustration and aggression. For example, you could design a study that frustrates a subset of students and doesn't frustrate another subset, and then see if they behave differently. One study did this. Researchers asked a sample of elementary school students what their favorite toys were. The next day they returned and let the students know that they had collected the toys and that each student would have 10 minutes to play with the toys individually in another room. Throughout the day, the researchers took each student to the room where the toys were. Upon arriving at the room, they found that the room was locked. For half the students, the researcher had the key, and they were let in immediately. For the other half, the researcher said they had to go get the key from another room and to wait at the door for their return. These students that stayed at the door were there looking through the glass at the room beyond, which contained all the toys they liked best. They had to wait a few minutes, thinking about how great it would be, but frustrated that their time in the room was slowly passing, and they were not playing. Eventually, the researcher returned and let them in. The difference in waiting or not waiting was the manipulation of frustration. Half of the students were frustrated, and the others were not. The students in both groups were then given the same time to play with the toys by themselves. The measure of aggression was how the students played with their toys. The students who were frustrated engaged in more aggressive playstyles, crashing cars together, throwing toys, and other aggressive behaviors. This test demonstrated that frustration, the only thing that differed between the groups, led to more aggression. The findings from this study can then be used to generate and support a new theory, or add to or adapt an existing theory. If the findings are consistent with an existing theory, this theory then can lead researchers to looking for more examples in the real world, or generating new hypotheses and studies. If the findings are not consistent with an existing theory, additional work needs to be done to explain the findings, often leading to additional hypotheses and studies. As you can see, research is circular, with observations leading to hypotheses, leading to studies, leading to theory. However, theories can also lead to observations and additional hypotheses. The field of psychology is ever-changing, with new hypotheses, studies, and theories improving our understanding of human behaviors, thoughts, and emotions. This is why, even when our findings do not support our hypotheses or theories, we can uncover new and interesting possibilities. This is why humility is an important part of the scientific attitude. We need to be open to the possibility that our beliefs about how humans behave could be flawed, or need further exploration. Then we will be prepared to recognize the importance of even unexpected findings.